I want to clarify that this podcast is distinct from my responsibilities as a professor in the Sam M. Walton College of Business. Nonetheless, it aligns with my aspiration to provide practical insights to professionals and business by showcasing companies and people that can enhance your ability to manage, lead, and strategize and market effectively in the retail value chain. And now, without further ado, let's get into the exciting episode. I have with me today Michael Zimmerman, who is a partner with Kearney, and he has an extensive background in consulting. He's been with Kearney for over 16 years, but he also has lots of experience with companies like SAP and Carrier Corporation and others. He has his MBA from Darden. Michael, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Cheers. It's good to be here, Matt. Always love talking about logistics and look forward to covering some interesting topics with you.
Would you mind telling us a little bit about what you do at Kearney and your background there?
Yeah, happy to do that. I specialize in logistics at Kearney, logistics sourcing and optimization. And I've been here building that capability at the firm with my partner colleagues for, I think I'm in my 17th year now. I got here by starting in supply chain operations at a company called US Surgical at the time. After a few acquisitions, the brand is now Medtronic. I worked at Carrier Corporation, which was part of United Technologies. And those are all supply chain roles, materials management programming, inbound and outbound logistics. So good hands-on operations experience, followed by strategic sourcing at a company called Free Markets that got bought by Ariba, that got bought by SAP. And that was all about bringing technology, strategic sourcing technology, to the sourcing process and helping companies in that space. I then specialized in logistics sourcing and optimization with my own company and then joining Kearney in 2009. And that's led me to work across the Fortune 500 over the last 17 years in logistics sourcing and optimization, problem solving, if you will, within the larger context of strategic operations.
So getting right into it, Michael, many people say volatility, the level of volatility we have now has become the new normal. And from your perspective, has it really this level of volatility become structural at this point?
I think very much so. I think volatility has become structural. It's not cyclical anymore. And the evidence is beyond the headlines, right? So when you look at risk data over the last 20 years, disruption frequency and severity are up. And this has been cataloged by insurers and reinsurance companies. So Swiss Re, Alliance have reported, multi-decade upward trends in weather, geopolitical risk, trade policy. These drivers directly translate into logistics volatility. And then global logistics performance metrics have become more unstable. So ocean schedule reliability has been below pre-2020 levels after demand normalized. Transit time variability is much higher. And then if you look at trade policy itself, it's become a source of uncertainty. It's been weaponized. And so since the late 2010s, tariffs, sanctions, export controls, that's been creating shocks rather than smooth cycles, right? And what you see is that firms have been redesigning their supply chains around this assumption. So they've been multi-sourcing. You've heard of terms like nearshoring and friendshoring, regionalization. Those things are hard to do, but they've been underway since the 2010s, and that's only been accelerating. That also means higher inventory buffers. So optionality isn't anymore something you kind of create in a temporary way. It's something that you have to hard code into network design, into contracts and technology investments. I think that's the clearest proof, is that companies are permanently trading, efficiency for resilience. They're signaling that volatility is no longer an exception. It's a design constraint, a design requirement.
So, thinking about planning, both short-term and long-term planning, and you've got a lot of experience. So I'm wondering how, given the level of volatility, how has our approach to planning changed, or how should it change, both short-term and long-term?
Yeah, I mean, if you accept that volatility is structural, planning can no longer be a linear lock-in exercise. So historically, supply chain planning assumed relative stability. You forecast demand, you optimize for cost, you lock in capacity through annual bids and multi-year contracts, and then you manage exceptions as they arise, right? But that model breaks when disruptions are frequent, they're asymmetric, and long-lasting, because a lot of these trade policy-related changes that we've been seeing, I think it's wishful thinking to think they're going to be reversed in the short and the medium term. So that means the old way of planning, it's not dead, but it has to be severely modified. And leaders need to think of what we call, layered planning. So you have a long-term plan, but you define ranges, options, and constraints rather than single commitments. So if you take, what's very typical for large corporations, annual ocean and road bids, for example, those become capacity portfolios with flexibility clauses, optional lanes, pre-negotiated alternatives. Warehousing networks are designed with swing capacity to be able to move up or down and have exit ramps, not just fixed commitments with utilization targets. And then short-term planning operates inside that long-term envelope. So you have explicit decision triggers. What happens if a sailing is blanked, if a country source becomes unavailable, or if lead times double? Those moves, have to be pre-approved, modeled, and executable in days. Not like what we saw a lot during COVID was, debating this in real time. You heard a lot about control towers. Well, it turned out that control towers were 15 different stakeholders showing up on a Teams call that lasted 4 hours as options were debated. That's simply not acceptable in a world where you have to make good decisions quickly and have your options already played out. We'll probably talk about this at some point, but if you do have to debate things in real time, you better have some agentic AI in place to help support the debate. So to tie this up, I would say the goal isn't to predict disruptions better, but to plan for fast reconfiguration. So your planning shifts from optimize and hold to design for change. And resilience and speed are treated as priority objectives alongside cost, of course.
So you mentioned resilience, and that comes to mind when I think of volatility, obviously, resilience and agility. So I'm wondering what kind of capabilities are required for this level of volatility to achieve, resilience and agility in terms of people, processes, and technology.
Right. And those are really the things that leaders have to work with, in their supply chains and in their worlds of logistic. And so that I think the common thread through people, processes, and technology is decision quality under volatility, right? If our thread is that volatility is here to stay and you have to be able to make better decisions in that kind of a context, if you look at it for each of those components, on people, experience matters more than ever, not just generic, tenure, but contextual logistics experience, leaders who have lived through demand shocks, through COVID, through carrier cycles, through tsunamis, disruptions, and recovery as well, right? And I see as a consultant working, across the Fortune 1000, I see a lot of companies rotating logistics leaders maybe too quickly in the name of breadth, in the name of preparing general management skills. That creates generalists, but it kind of weakens resilience, right? Because hard-earned pattern recognition, that takes experience, that can get lost. So if you are going to do that, because that's part of some of the company cultures, you should at least have really powerful playbooks and disciplined handovers. Because for me, the most important thing in the people space is that, either personal, team, or institutionalized experience and knowledge on how to deal with a difficult category. Process and technology, I'll try to hit those quickly. I see a lot of locally optimized processes. You hear about corporate silos. They're still out there. In fact, that's the way most of them still operate. But agility really breaks down at the seams between the silos. And so the biggest failures I see are not, with load planning or sourcing, but in the handoffs, right? So order management into load planning, forecasting into capacity commitments. So resilient processes have to be explicitly cross-functional and designed around collaboration to understand, work with and resolve constraints. And then finally, in technology, I'm a big fan of evolution, not revolution and big transformation in technology. So the best teams really understand their current tech stack and layers, so ERP, TMS, WMS, global trade management, and they're focused on the use cases, lane level rate leakage detection on top of a TMS, or lane level decision support, exception management, AI co-pilots to help with bid preparation. So for technology, I think the big leaps fail because they overload the people and the processes at the same time. Get those use cases and get them working with your existing technology stack would be my choice on technology.
So I know you're exposed to lots of different companies, and I'm curious when it comes to building resilience, where do you see companies failing to build it? In terms of both, logistics and supply chain.
Yeah, I think most organizations fail at resilience before execution ever starts. And again, it's at the design and the sourcing stage. So they might optimize logistics as static, cost minimized network built around a single demand forecast, rather than as a portfolio of capacity options. I've started to see a range, but if you think about 10 years ago, it really was the former. We're planning for something fairly static and we're going to adapt. And the reason they then fail or fall short, when they need to be resilient, is that when the volatility hits, the rigid design convulses and sometimes collapses. So, carrier mixes can be over concentrated. The capacity commitments that they've made, limit your ability to surge, or if they're not getting what they expected, they're going to reallocate that capacity elsewhere. So these rigidities that can be built into an assumption that the world's going to be stable, then fail when the world behaves in a volatile manner. Think of it as optionality was historically engineered out of processes and plans because they were more costly, right? Having backup carriers means you have to develop those carriers. Having contingent warehouse space means you need to plan and maybe commit to potential extra space. Or being able to flex down means you won't get a discount for committing to a higher volume. So there are costs associated with that. But when you plan in a more rigid world or an expected rigid world, the result's pretty predictable. Expediting explodes, premium labor gets pulled in, detention and dwell spike, budgets blow out. Think of it as the cost of buying efficiency without insurance. So what leaders have to do to sell the concept of resilience is that they kind of have to prepay for it by having a little more fat in their planning, by building, for example, ocean, road, and warehousing as a capacity portfolio and negotiating in, the on-ramps and the off-ramps, having primary and secondary carriers, pre-priced and ready to move to with understandings that you may have to flex up or down. That takes extra effort, extra cost, but that's how you avoid failing at the resilience game.
Supply chain leaders are facing just an incredible amount of change and an explosion in the availability of data, information, and new tools for all different kinds of tools. And yet, to be a good leader, you have to set priorities to deal with all of this. But how can you do it in a way that doesn't overwhelm the organization?
Yeah. And I think what will definitely overwhelm an organization is any kind of a tool for a strategy, because everyone is bombarded by tools. Obviously, the providers are trying to sell them. You've got, the kind of the ERP will do everything versus the best of breed. And that seems to be the debate. And I think, the way to avoid being overwhelmed by all of these options is to simply not prioritize the tools and prioritize the kinds of decisions that are going to change outcomes for you. So data and technology only matter if they're improving the decisions that drive profit and resilience. And what I mean by that is, for most shippers in logistics, it's a pretty consistent short list on what's going to drive profit and resilience. Transportation sourcing, it can be 80, 90% between the modes and the nodes of your logistics spend, right? On top of that, the ERP and the people, they're actually a small fraction of what you spend. So if you want to be thinking about how you're going to be most, profitable and agile, you need to be excellent at a few things, right? So sourcing, capacity assurance, supplier performance management, those are the things that are going to let you operate efficiently and effectively at an attractive cost. And then, if a tool isn't going to materially help those things, you shouldn't spend a lot of time on them. So what we've helped a lot of our clients do is, map the core logistics activities and ask two questions. Is it strategically differentiating for us? Does it help us win in the market? And are we better or worse at it than the market is? And so high return on investment initiatives where the activity is strategic and you're internally capable and it can be upgraded to either sustain or extend your market leadership, those are the technologies you want to invest in. If it's non-strategic or the company lags the market, you look for more capable 3PL partners and you close the gap that way.
That seems like a really wise way to think about it. Were you going to say something else?
Yeah, I was just going to say is the consequence of that, and you've seen this in a lot of companies, and this is one of the reasons 3PLs have grown so much, is that things like transactional execution, load planning, tendering, track and trace, freight audit, that's largely been outsourced or automated. It's table stakes. It doesn't allow you to differentiate yourself strategically. But if you think about leading shippers, and how they're going to differentiate themselves, strategic sourcing, network design, supplier relationship, as I mentioned, that's where 80 to 90% of the logistics spend is committed, right? And where capacity is won or lost when capacity gets tight. So by focusing on what's strategic and creating the most value and driving the most cost, you can then ask which tools out there in the marketplace are going to help me excel in that space. 20 years ago, it was collaborative optimization tools, which helped large shippers really master the complexity of logistics sourcing and carrier prioritization and capacity allocation. most Fortune 500 companies have adopted those tools over the last 20 years. They emerged in the early 2000s. They're now standard everywhere. Or they're using those tools through their 3PLs, because the 3PLs have gotten good at using them. What's next? Well, we'll be talking about that soon, but they're now looking for tools that are going to help them further differentiate in those areas.
Okay, Michael, now for the topic we cannot avoid, artificial intelligence. So how is artificial intelligence influencing prioritization and decision-making in supply chain, and where's it really adding value today?
Yeah, I love being use case focused. So rather than making blanket statements about how it's going to improve everything, I see its current applications in certain spaces. I think it's going to grow very quickly, and that promise is going to come. But I think today it's influencing prioritization and decision making most effectively, where it's accelerating and improving, repeatable, high volume logistics decisions. And by that I mean, and I'm contrasting that to where you require judgment and experience. So what AI does really well is plowing through huge amounts of data from disparate sources, gathering the data, cleansing it in the sense that it understands and can normalize the data in its database, if you will, in its knowledge set, and then enhance that with its knowledge of different sources and start to create visibility and insight. So, for example, agentic AI is very strong in logistics, in freight audit and pay, spend visibility, and sourcing support. And those are areas where teams are historically losing, weeks and sometimes months to data extraction, cleansing, normalization, exception handling. AI does that extremely well. But what it doesn't do is, have a good conversation with suppliers over what capacity commitment looks like and what happens when you need an extra 30% or you need to ramp down by 30%. What happens to my drop trailer pool when I need 30% less volume? AI is not ready to have that conversation, but it is ready to prompt a member of the shipping team and say, look, our volumes are down for 4 consecutive weeks at this DC, and we have 3 carriers with trailer pools who are going to be suffering. You better do something about it. So AI is very good at bringing together information and doing a lot of the data collection and cleansing scut work, if you will, and bringing things to the attention of the resources. And the beauty of that is that it also elevates the work of the people using AI, right? So it's not like it's labor reduction, it's decision compression. It's providing better content for logistics practitioners to make better decisions quicker. It collapses the time from raw data to actionable insight. And that's what I really like about it, because having worked in operations and having seen teams as a consultant where the teams don't have time for these higher value added activities, cross-functional teaming, working with the order management team to make the chunks of orders that are arriving more digestible for load planning. Those are more cross-functional human interactive activities. If they're chasing after freight audit and pay data or trying to cleanse actual shipments for the last month to do some planning, they don't have time for those higher value activities. So I really like the way agentic AI is delivering on these kinds of use cases.
So, Michael, looking ahead, what should supply chain leaders be focused on right now and in the future to make sure they maintain competitiveness and effectiveness?
Yeah, I mean, you've been hearing about, we've been talking about volatility and the ability to plan for and make better decisions under volatility. And I think the greatest focus should be on being advantage in your decision making under this kind of structural volatility. So the winners won't be the teams with the most tools. We were talking about tools. They're the teams that can sense, decide, and reconfigure faster without blowing out cost, right? So we've been talking about designing optionality into the system, multi-sourcing, capacity portfolios in ocean and road with flex clauses, pre-price alternatives, warehousing networks that include swing capacity, ability to move up or down, and that's made explicit in the agreements that, within a week, we can maybe go up 15% or 20% by adding overtime. Within 3 weeks, we can go up 50 or 60% by adding a second shift, and vice versa. How do we drop volumes by 10 or 20% without heavily penalizing ourselves? So you design that kind of optionality so that your resilience is prepaid, not improvised. So we talked about designing optionality into the system. You have to invest in capabilities at the seams. So we talked about people, processes, and tools. If you have these historic silos, how do you invest more in cross-silo collaboration? So what are those handoffs between forecast, order management, sourcing, and execution? Because that's where agility breaks down, right? If people expect to manage batches within their silos, they're not going to be effective when they have to be more agile. And then we talked about technology, layered use cases, not big transformation. Use AI where it already adds value, compressing decisions in spend visibility, sourcing support, exception workflows, and then keep your humans doing the higher value added work so that they can be ready to act under uncertainty. And of course, as you trust AI more, it can expand its scope of action. But I think this idea of keeping it focused, and technology solutions focused on use cases is going to help make the decisions where to invest. And then I think there's kind of a larger takeaway is, keeping the people who are making these judgments precious, valuing them, keeping experienced logistics leadership long enough that they can be well-grounded and recognized and speak with authority, codify that into playbooks if there's turnover, so that the experience base that's managing this is continuously growing, that you don't have too many breaks in the knowledge.
So, Michael, we have a large number of senior supply chain leaders that listen to this podcast. And what one piece of advice would you really give them that you think might help them succeed?
I'm going to have to be more succinct here. So, consistent with our conversation, I would say decision advantage, being able to make better logistics decisions faster than your peers under uncertainty, and then execute them without friction. So point efficiency, long-term planning can't be the only answer anymore. But how to get decision advantage has to be sold. So the leaders not only should pursue it, but they should explain why they're pursuing it, why they're investing in it, right? Volatility is structural. We have to prepay for optionality, for capacity portfolios, for flex clauses, for swing capacity, so we can, reconfigure faster in a more agile manner without blowing out costs. So we're going to be ruthless in our investment. I'm speaking as a leader here. We're going to focus people and technology on the logistics conditions that actually, move spend, that give us the competitive advantage, better service, better resilience. And then we're going to, either outsource and make sure it's outsourced to highly capable 3PLs and partners, where they can do it better, or we're simply going to de-emphasize it if it's not creating that advantage in the marketplace.
Well, Michael, this has been really insightful. Your wisdom in this topic is very evident. Thank you so much for taking time to share with the audience. Really appreciate it.
Matt, it's a real pleasure. It's great to be out there constantly in the marketplace and see how these things are playing out. And one thing is certain, for logistics leaders, they've chosen a very exciting, some would say too exciting profession. And it's just continuously gotten more interesting. So it's a great place to be.